We've spent a lot of time talking about what the Minnesota Timberwolves have done this offseason, but Trey Lyles hasn't really been part of that conversation. I mean, he's a career journeyman, he was playing in Spain last season, and he's on a minimum deal. It makes sense we haven't spoken about him. But with the way the Wolves are currently constructed, it seems like there's at least a chance that he's seeing real rotation minutes next season. Now, I don't think he's going to start games, I don't think he's going to be an indispensable part of this roster, but he's a big-bodied power forward on a team that has precisely zero big-bodied power forwards, and that means he really might be a piece we actually see some of next season. With Lyles, the main thing worth talking about is his shooting. During his final 2 NBA seasons before he went overseas, 66% of his field goal attempts came from long range. He's not a shot creator, he's not great as a roll man in pick and roll, and he's not going to command post touches. In an NBA offense, he's a floor spacing 4-man, and that's about all he is. And what makes him someone who just hasn't stuck in the league is the consistency of that jumper and how it just hasn't been there over his career. In his 10-year stint in the league, he had 5 seasons shooting above 36% and 5 seasons shooting below 36%. And whether he makes those shots at that respectable clip or not, kind of determines whether he's a playable asset. In those seasons where he did shoot over 36%, he's averaged out as a positive to his team's offense when he's on the floor, and a league average efficiency guy in general. When he isn't making his threes as often, he's a net negative and someone who is well below league average efficiency. So if the Wolves get one of those Trey Lyles seasons where he makes threes, he's going to be a valuable role player. If they don't, well, he just isn't. And the reason he's valuable when he's making those threes is because he's a pretty versatile shooter for a big, and that fits into any scheme, including Minnesota's. First of all, he's a really fluid shooter. He's not a stiff. He's got a quick trigger that does allow him to get shots off in rhythm in a variety of different ways and do it in a variety of different situations. He's not someone who needs 3 seconds to load up his jumper. He's not going to completely abandon his jumper if there is a defender closing out. That means his shooting actually has some functional value and he can be plugged into an offensive system in a role that demands him to be a shooter. If he's having one of those seasons where he makes those shots and stays consistent enough to add value to the team as a shooting threat. He's obviously not Naz Reid, but as a very discounted version of Naz, there's definitely some similarities in their games, and that's including this quick trigger jumper. And that jumper opens up the ability to use Lyles in different ways. If the defense is in drop coverage sitting back here, he's going to pop out of those screens pretty quick to get up shots before the big can recover back out to him. That's a pretty valuable skill set to have on any team still, and the Wolves really don't have anyone who naturally runs pick and pop game right now. Now, with the way Anthony Edwards and now LaMelo Ball can shoot off the bounce, I doubt Minnesota sees a ton of drop coverage defense, but if they do want to sit deeper and get aggressive like this to cut off drives and paint touches from those guys, Lyles is going to be able to punish teams on the pop there. Like everything with Lyles, he's not reinventing any wheels here with the things that he does as a shooter. Pick and pop action is very basic, but if he's making threes, it's a nice thing to have in the bag for an offense. I do like the speed at which he gets out of those ball screens, which makes it tough for even a Wemby level defender to recover back out to him. It's just a nice change of pace 4-man to have in their back pocket against a defense who really does want to play in a drop. Mostly, I think this is applicable to the Wolves in situations where the defense is pushing up to hedge or blitz with 2 on the ball, and he can kind of just flow out of it into open shooting pockets. How many times last season did we see Edwards covered like that? And LaMelo is the same. Having that pressure release shooting big on the roster is probably going to help them some next season, especially with Naz Reid gone. If he does give them someone who sets real screens, gets out of them quickly, and then flows into catch and shoot threes pretty naturally, there's probably situations where Lyles makes sense next season. More importantly, with Ant and LaMelo, he needs to make threes to just be another player who can capitalize on the gravity that those two on-ball monsters create. Those two are in situations where this gap help is super heavy on them so often, so any player who can spread the floor and make shots to alleviate some of that is going to at least have some value on this Wolves team. The more players who can punish defenders when they tuck into these gaps, the better it will be for the health of Minnesota's offense, and again, Lyles needs to be that because he's not really adding value anywhere else offensively. The same logic applies on downhill attacks. If Lyles is a shooting outlet, he's a handy back-end rotation piece. Like if the defense rotates off him, that's a shot that's going to be there for him. Again, it's nothing special, but with the downhill forces that Minnesota have, this low man rotation is so common, and it's something Naz Reid feasted on as a shooter. I'm guessing they're hoping they can replicate that to a much lesser degree with Lyles. I mean, I can easily envision a situation where someone shifts off Lyles to tag Gobert on a LaMelo pick and roll, and they create an open look from the corner for him. He just needs to actually knock down those shots like he has in around half of his NBA career seasons. Again, you can picture the gap help sucking in on LaMelo, and then the same thing on Ant off the catch, and a low usage shooter like Lyles benefiting from that gravity that those two create. There was even a little bit of evidence over his past 2 NBA seasons of Lyles being able to shoot off the move, coming out of off-ball screening actions, and being able to shoot in more designed play calls. But even without that being a big part of his game, if the Wolves get a version of Trey Lyles who takes and makes threes, they're probably getting a legit rotation piece who will find himself minutes with the way that they are currently constructed. Now, for him to kind of be somewhat playable, not only does Lyles have to make threes, but he needs to not be a liability defensively. He's just not going to be a high impact level defender ever, but I think if he's a rotation piece, he just needs to do enough to be viable. That's not going to come in pick and roll coverage, he just isn't agile enough to push up and blitz or switch onto a guard, but he's not a drop defender in this position who's capable of holding the fort in these situations. Teams will try to get him into actions where they can trap him in that drop coverage because he's just not mobile or big enough to really be a positive defender there. I don't think anybody in or out of the organization expects Trey Lyles to be a pick and roll stopper, but still, if he's a regular in the rotation, we are going to see Lyles get picked on in these situations. The Wolves aren't going to want him in the pick and roll, and he's not really someone you can trust out in space against high level types of scorers either, which really does limit his versatility and ultimately limit the overall impact he can have on games, especially on the defensive end. But I think what he does do is provide a pretty good understanding of positional defense, and that's important in a Rudy Gobert defensive system. Again, you don't want him up here in the screening action, but as the low man helper sliding into tag, reading the possession, and then making that extra rotation to slide into help here on the strong side, he's pretty smart with those kinds of things defensively. Minnesota has a great defensive ecosystem, so someone who can pre-screen these kinds of rotations and just be in the right place will probably work decently well. Again, this reminds me of Naz Reid. He wasn't good in ball screens or out in space, but he did the right things positionally a lot. And that's why, when he had Gobert there to do the heavy lifting for him, the team was always great defensively. Like, Lyles and Gobert aren't going to hit the Naz and Gobert levels of 10 points per 100 possessions better defensively than league average when they're together, but we saw early in Lyles' career in Utah that him and Gobert can form a defensive partnership that is noticeably better than the league average was at the time, and I don't see why that couldn't continue somewhere in that vicinity again. Any player that can make the right rotations and allow Gobert to tidy up at the rim can be a really good partner next to the big man defensively. I think Lyles can probably do those sorts of things to a decent degree. The last thing worth touching on here with Lyles is the rebounding, because again, that's probably going to factor into his potential game time next season if Minnesota don't upgrade their current power forward rotation. Like most of his game, there's nothing really special here, but Lyles is an NBA caliber rebounder, and the Wolves probably need that. He ranked in the 90th percentile or above in defensive rebounding percentage in 3 of his 10 seasons, and above the 80th percentile in another 3. I mean, he's just a natural 4. He seems to understand positioning and body work and how to find rebounding pockets in the way that most natural bigs kind of do. Minnesota lost a lot of rebounding with Randall and Reed going out this offseason, so if they're thinking about giving Trey Lyles minutes, the fact that he can slot into a rebounding role seamlessly will probably play a pretty big part in that decision. If things do work out for him and he's a help on the glass, a shooter who can help grease the wheels of their offense, and a somewhat passable defender, then Trey Lyles makes some sense on this Wolves team. It's not going to be in a big role, but I do think there is a role there for him as things stand right now. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more off-season breakdowns coming up, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for watching.